This is going to be our Zinc 2.0 build guide 2.0. We get a lot of questions about how we build our Zinc so well and so fast, and the old build guide is quite out of date, and we've learned a lot of things since then, so we're going to redo this build guide with the Zinc 2.0. So first thing I like to do is well, make sure I got all my parts. So all the hardware bits, I've got all my printed parts. And then tools I'm gonna need, of course, we have some lube here that is low viscosity. Then we've got super glue, a Phillips driver, and optionally you can use a 5/16 socket to tighten the hex nut if you want to. And if your prints need to be post-processed to fit things better, you're gonna need a 9/64" drill bit as well. So 9/64. Your results may vary depending on how your prints came out. You may also need a 3/16. We used to do all those drilling, but the files now are so good that we don't really need to drill and hardly sand anything, so we can build one of these in 5-6 minutes. So what we're gonna do is first I actually start with the frame piece because it's big, and we'll take a small file, and I like to file the inside of the trigger guard. A lot of times you'll get overhang on the bottom, or I guess I should say on the top of the trigger guard, so filing that will make the mag release fit. So we're gonna file that until the mag release fits. And we want it to be pretty smooth. That's probably smooth enough to work, but I want it a little smoother because it doesn't drop free. So what I also like to do after that is just take a flat file and file around where the printer maybe had some of the corners not come out as clean. So I'm gonna file the corner there, then the rounded edge, make that a little more rounded. File the top where you have all the steps from the layer heights, and then file that last corner. And then it should fit, and it should just about drop through like that. That is nice and loose. Then we're gonna take one of our small compression springs. Now these compression springs, we just take a 1-inch compression spring and cut it in half. Half right there. That'll be used for the catch and the trigger guard. So we're gonna take our trigger guard, and the way I like to do this is I like to put the trigger guard into the slot with the mag release, and then in the side I will slide in. I like to do the cut side in first. Doesn't really matter. Cut side in first, and as I push it together, you can use a small pick for this as well, or a flathead screwdriver. I will use my fingernail to just push that spring in, and then I will set the trigger guard in like that, boom, just like that. And then I'll close those together. See that mag release already popped into place. And I wanna make sure the mag release fully resets as well. It should come all the way full to either side. And then I'll just set the top of the trigger guard in and push that into place. There you go. And then to keep the trigger guard from falling out ever, I'm gonna use one of these pins, same pins as a caliburn or Talon Claw, etc. And I just like to push it in. If your prints came out too tight, you're going to want to do a 5/64 drill bit and drill that hole a little wider. But I'm just gonna use my muscles and a little bit of luck and push it through. Smooth as butter. And then I'm gonna take another pin and my 1-inch compression spring, and I'm gonna put the 1-inch compression spring at the bottom of the grip for my mag eject. If your pins come out too tight, you can drill that out with the 3/16. And then this pin, unfortunately, turns out to be just barely too long, so I'm gonna cut it about there, about 2/3, maybe 3/4. Doesn't really matter. It's just used to hold in the spring. So I'm gonna push down that spring and then push the pin in, and there you go. If that pin again is loose, you can use a drop of super glue to hold it in place. Or if it's too tight, you can use 5/64 drill bit. If it's just right, then you're good to go. Then I will test fit my barrel and my trigger I'll make sure the trigger can slide freely. Yep. If it's too tight, you will want to sand or file either side of the trigger guard or the trigger. While I'm here, I'll also mention that you may want to file the trigger guard. If it's too tight in the slot, you could risk cracking the frame if you push too hard. So again, just filing the contact points there will make that fit better. Then we'll take our barrel, and I like to test fit the barrel on the trigger. It should slide smooth. Depending on how your bridging settings go, you may need to file this overhang here. Then I'll test fit the barrel into the frame. Again, depending on your overhang, you might have to file just this top part. I like to use a round file. And just file the bottom of that little trench for the muzzle. And maybe do a little bit on the sides as well so it fits nice and smooth, depending on how your corners came out as well. Just file it until the barrel fits. It can be a push fit. It doesn't have to be a gravity fit, but that's good enough. I'll set my trigger into that, and then I'll set my trigger spring on top of that. And then the easiest way I find to set the barrel so it goes straight all the way through and then into this printed part here. If you get it crooked and it's sitting not in line, then you could break this part. Is I like to push the spring and the trigger down and help guide the barrel into the rest of the print and push it down on the table. So you'll set the barrel into all this, make sure it's in line and doesn't get pinched between the spring and the printed parts. All right, there we go. So we'll just push it in place, just pop right into place. And trigger actuation smooth, otherwise you need to take out the barrel. If you ever need to remove the barrel, use a 1/2 inch diameter pipe and push it from the back. Like so. Stick that in there, push it down, pop off the barrel. Then from here, I like to do the catch. I'll take my Sear, make sure it fits my 440 by 1 inch screw. And so it slides and pivots, perfect. If you want to, you can clean this up as well. Any of that print gunk that came out of those holes, depending on how your prints came out. And then I will take my front piece and my Sear spring. This guy can go launching across the room, so be careful. But all I do is I hold it in my hands like this with the legs out like that. And then with the iron sight facing me, I put the bottom leg against the lip and I just push the whole thing down. There you go. May take a couple tries, but you want to get that lined up so when the screw goes through, you go through the middle of the spring and not crushing the spring, and then tighten that down just enough so that screw is, you know, pretty flush, but the Sear still pivots. Next, I will do all the gluing with my handy dandy super glue. You could also use Loctite for the guide rod, but I like to use super glue because it works. So I'm just gonna super glue all the parts together that need to be glued at this juncture. And I will file my magnets. There are rumors that magnet dust is harmful and toxic. It is not, and we're not sanding that much. So we're just gonna score up the surface. That gives the glue a little bit more to grip onto so the magnets don't pop out. And then we're going to put a drop of glue into each place you want it. I'm going to do some glue, you know, maybe around the circle there for the thumb nut. Again, do a drop of glue into each one of those spots. Insert your magnets. And if they're really tight to get in, like I said, you can give it a tap with a hammer, or you can give it a squeeze with just a pair of wrenches, but just make sure you squeeze it not too hard that you damage the print. Or you can use the thumb nut on the reverse side as support as you squeeze it together. Then the last thing we'll glue is, I'll put on the shorter thread side. The guide rod has a longer and a shorter thread. I'm gonna do a drop of super glue. The thread on the larger nut, not your thumb nut. And then I'm gonna put 2 magnets on the front piece so that they're properly oriented, and then do 2 more drops of glue on the inside of the slide, and then press those together. And again, if it's a tight fit, you can use a pair of pliers to set them. There we go. Then I'm gonna work on the catch. I wanna make sure that the CNC core fits in the little spring guide circle. If it's tight, then you'll get kind of a rough prime on the last little bit. Depending on how your prints turned out, you may or may not need to do anything on that. If you need to though, you can use a long file or a 1/2-inch drill bit, and you can clean up the inside of that hole. Okay, and then depending on how your prints came out, I'm gonna also pull out some of this, some of the bridging hairs. I just wanna make sure that my catch can fit and move up and down freely. That's pretty good. If you want, you can also file the corners to make sure it's extra smooth. There you go. And then I will use my 2 more short compression springs, and I will use my top piece and put it on the top here. I'm just going to use one of the 440 flatheads. Tighten that down just so it's flush. You don't have to, over tighten it or anything. You want the catch to be able to move up and down. Okay, and then I will do my guide rod and plunger next. So I'll take a 104 O-ring and slide it on for the shock pad. Then I will take my plunger. I'm going to use the high power or the shorter plunger. I'm going to put a 117 O-ring on that and then slide that on. If it's too tight of a fit, you will want to use a 9/64 drill bit to loosen it, but that fits just right. You don't want really any friction on that. Then I'm going to do another 104 O-ring. Some people opt to not use this O-ring. This is supposed to create an air seal between the plunger and then the CNC core. However, some people find that not using the O-ring also works. I find that using an O-ring is just fine. And then I'm going to close those together and tighten them down. And you can either use an 11mm crescent or just a pair of pliers. And I'm going to tighten that down just enough so that it is tight, and then I'll stop. I'm not going to over tighten it because I found that you can then create some torquing between the core, the plunger, and the guide rod, causing undue friction or unnecessary friction. The last thing I'll do is I'll take my spring. Now this is just a 1/2 length or a 5.5 inches of K25 spring. One end I've cut, the other end is a factory end, which they usually already clean up for you. So the end I cut, if I don't want to clean it up, I'm going to make sure that the end I cut that is not cleaned up is the end that is not going to be moving. So I'm going to put the factory end or the clean or smoother end or whatever spring you've got, put that on the plunger. And then I'm going to take this moment to add O-rings and lube to the rest of the assembly. I've got the rear piece. I'm going to do another 117 O-ring and a 011 O-ring. Just like that. Make sure those sit flat. If you've got bad overhangs, then you could pull those off or push the O-ring in so it sits nice and round and concentric. These O-rings seem to be fine. And then I'm going to take my lube once more. While I'm here, I like to lube my pusher O-ring. Now this stuff is pretty liquid, so a little bit of drop and then gravity can do the rest. Then I will lube my larger O-ring, and then I will lube my plunger tube. That is just about all you need. Then I will take my plunger, and I like to go spring side first into the lube and the tube. and then I'll take that whole assembly and put it into the back of the slide. Now, you don't need to spread the slide out very much, but you will need to stretch the slide just enough so it fits around the plunger tube. I have, other than, 2 years ago, I have never had a slide break on me. All you need to do is pull it open just enough to fit that tube in, and you're good. There you go. All these prints are PLA, so that being said, they are more brittle than, say, a PETG print. And so if you are worried about it, you can print your slide in PETG to make that flex more without breaking. Again, I've never broken a PLA slide, so however your prints come out, I guess. But then I'll just push that to then seat the muzzle on. You can either push it up with your thumb and tighten the muzzle, or I found maybe faster is to use, again, the 5/16 socket. Tighten that just so it's flush to the end. Right there. That can help too if your thumb nut isn't sitting quite straight, or you maybe have a little bit of super glue stuck in the hole, causing the threads to be tight. It can be really hard to tighten that with just your fingers, or you could use, a pair of pliers or needle nose pliers, and you can hold that nut down and then twist it. I would use needle nose there. You can hold that nut and then twist it as well, tighten it. But there you go. There's the slide. At this point, I like to test it, make sure it primes and locks correctly. This is very important though, that you do not twist it while pulling it like this. I like to pull it straight out and then until it catches. Now, do not angle it or torque it. And if you're worried about bending anything, then you might be better off to do it a different way, but I like to do it this way. What you can do is you can put the muzzle on first, onto the frame, and then put the slide on. That works too. This way works out, so I can test it as I go. So I'm just gonna pull it straight apart until it clicks. Perfect. That wasn't too hard. It didn't seize up right where the catch engaged. It was pretty smooth. So then I'm going to set that and then add my rear piece. I like to install it by pushing on the top and then pushing down. Now, depending on how your prints came out and your tolerances and whatnot, the rear piece may cause the slide to bow out like you see here. And that'll cause a lot of friction on the slide so it doesn't properly reset fully. So here's what we do is we'll put our screws into the rear piece, and before we drive them through the slide, we'll take a pair of pliers or needle nose and we'll just squeeze these together. You could also push it down on the table, but we want to squeeze them together so that way it's not flared out as much, and then drive those screws in. You want to kind of maybe angle the screws up a little bit more than you think you have to, so that way you get into the holes. You don't want to strip it, so just be nice and gentle with it. Push down nice and hard, and let the screw drive itself into the plastic. You don't want to force it, but there you go. Then the last thing we'll do is put the slide on the frame. So again, I'll prime it, and I like to test, see how smooth that is. If the plunger was sitting crooked on the guide rod, you might have some scratching or some extra friction, in which case I would go back to the plunger, maybe loosen it a little bit from the core, or lubricate that, or maybe make the hole in the plunger bigger. But anyway, then I would slide the frame on and then put the muzzle on. So slide on. So you do have to kind of go around the muzzle a little bit, but that's okay. Just don't bend it too much. Or you could put the muzzle on first, then put the slide on, then screw the rod in, then your end cap. But this way is much easier. Slide. So I'll pull the slide back, then I'll set the muzzle in, lift up that Sear a little bit, get it around that trigger finger. I'll push that on, and then you should be good to go. There can be a lot of, depending on tolerances, there can be some friction between the prints. Sometimes you need lube, sometimes you don't. This one's pretty smooth without it. But I'm gonna do just a drop of lube on the contact surfaces, so left and right side of the rail, kind of where the slide rails across. Just the Sear pivot, maybe the catch, those things like to be more smooth, and then a drop on these rails there, and that's it. then when you pull the trigger, it should fire. So I'll plug the muzzle to fire. Perfect. Ideally, it should blow back, kind of. Not a feature, but it's a good way to test a good air seal. And there you go. If it doesn't fire, check your catch. It could be that your catch isn't moving up all the way. You may need to file the catch so that way it has more room to move up and down. If you rapidly prime it and it misfires, then your catch may have come out too small. You may need to take those catch springs, maybe stretch them, make them a bit stronger. You may need to file whatever print came out of spec. Usually the misfiring is due to something being caught on the catch, causing the catch not to go all the way down, so then you could file that slide. There's a couple of troubleshooting options for you. Of course, you can reach out to us with questions or read the comments and see what the community has done to build their Zincs easier. But there's my quick and dirty build guide. Don't forget though, your last 2 screws to hold the muzzle on. If you've got enough friction though between the muzzle and the frame, these are pretty optional, but pretty important if your prints came out pretty dang perfect. There you go. So moving it forward, you should be able to slap it down and have it close. Don't have quite enough room to slap it, but there you go. If there's too much friction, that's something to check out for. Trigger should fully reset, slide should fully reset. If the slide gets stuck somewhere here, then there's too much friction on the slide, and again, squeeze those together, lube that up, or worst case scenario, you could file those rails down where the slide rails through the frame, and that'll help. Last thing is the magazines. They're pretty easy. The first thing I like to do though is make sure the magazine bodies themselves fit and can be removed. If they're pretty tight, don't force it, you'll get it stuck. If it's a pretty good fit though, you can kind of work it in and out to wear it in. Yes, the sound is atrocious. It's the nature of 3D print on 3D print, but as they wear in, the sound gets better. Also in the heat of combat, there's plenty of other sounds going on anyway, but push that in. See that slide really, or the mag release locked. Slide comes out. Didn't come out all the way though, so I'm gonna work it a little bit more. There you go. If you find that as you push the button, the slide or the mag gets stuck, what you can do is pull to open the breech, push the mag release in, and then take a round file and then file the kind of the corners of the mag well is usually what you want, or the side of the mag release here. Can't really see that, but that tends to knock loose any gunk that may have been in the frame, so that way you get a smooth action. Test the other mag. Oh, even better. Just prints straight off the printer. The mag release spring, 118 designed it to be one spring that you then cut in half for 2 short mags. I find that a short length spring is long enough to also go up to a 9 round magazine. Anything longer than that, you may want to use a full spring or maybe 2/3 of a spring. But for these little 7 round guys, half spring is enough. Couple things to note though, depending on how your prints came out, is a lot of the problem with the mags come from the bases fitting into the bottom of the mag too tight, causing the mag to flare out on the bottom. And so when you get the magazine in almost all the way, it'll then get stuck on the very bottom. So what you can do, if your prints didn't come out right, you can file the side of the release here, or side of the base, and kind of file these tabs down. So basically anything on the surface that's sticking out, you know, this oval rectangle shape, you're gonna file down, and that'll help your base not to flare out the bottom of the mag too much. But I bet these prints came out just fine, so I'm gonna skip that. I'm just gonna do follower in the magazine like this. Make sure that follower sits flat across the top and is not crooked. I like to do the factory end down first, so that way I got a flat surface pushing up on my follower. And I like to put the cut end, kind of wedge that in between the locking tab and the middle. That way I won't accidentally run the risk of getting that cut end caught between the base and mag body, causing it to flare out too much. So I'm going to sit that into that little crevice, and then I'm going to push it in to make sure that I'm not pinching the back of the spring like that. And then I'm going to kind of try to push the base on all at once, but I'll push the back tab in and push the back of the mag in first, and then the front of the mag, so it sits in pretty quick, and then I'll push it straight on. There you go. That should be fully seated. If not, you can give it a wrap to get that base seated all the way, but that's how the mag is assembled. And there you go. Beautiful. That is a Zinc. Just for fun, we're gonna fire and chronograph this one. I just got Worker Gen 3 Plus darts. I guess you also want to check to make sure your mags go up and down. Maybe that spring got caught, or maybe you used the cut end and the cut end got stuck between the follower and the body. So you just want to push that, make sure it goes all the way up and down. See, that one's kind of stuck. Oh, there you go. Work it in, work it in. There you go. If it does get stuck, sometimes the top of the follower can get stuck on these windows here, and so you can take a file and file kind of the inside front surface of that magazine, basically filing if it doesn't fit, depending on how your prints came out. But without further ado, stock default K25. All right, not hit the side of the chronograph. There you go, 174, 173, 175. Default with the O-ring on everything, so stock 175. I've gotten mine to hit 200 just by adjusting, you know, the fit of some things, filing, better plunger print, that kind of stuff. But there you go.